Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us right here on The Right View. Tonight, we're so excited to be joined by New York Times bestselling author, award-winning journalist, and one of my favorite people to work with on camera. His new children's book, The Wise Men Who Found Christmas, is out now. Go get it. Raymond Arroyo. Raymond, thanks for joining us. Great
Laura,
to have
thank you for having me. Happy belated Thanksgiving. Happy early Christmas.
Thank you.
And I'm glad we can talk about Christmassy things.
Well, we know who to thank for that. I think Donald Trump was the one that said we're going to bring back Christmas. We're still saying Merry Christmas, so very fortunate for all of us. Yeah.
He did. He took the onus off.
It's a nice thing to be able to do these days. So happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas to all. You are, as many people know, from Louisiana, and I'm always curious to hear people's story because I have to know how a boy from Louisiana ended up in NYU's School of the Arts. It sounds like it could be written into a book of itself.
Well, it might be eventually, but not now. Look, in New Orleans, Laura, I grew up, I'm half Italian, half Spanish. So there were a lot of storytellers around. New Orleans is a place rich in tradition and history. We take our culture and the things that make us who we are very seriously.
Yeah.
And they like the idea of passing traditions on. And the spoken word, the stories of a family, of a town, of a particular part of town becomes part of your lived experience and your lore. So that was always rattling around in my mind, in my heart, even as a child. So I guess I had a grandmother who, my grandfather was a restaurateur in New Orleans and never could go anywhere with her at night. So she had season tickets to the Sanger Theater, this big, beautiful theater downtown in New Orleans. He could never go with her. So from the time I was like 5 till my teenage years, I went with my grandmother to these shows. So I had front row seats to Yul Brynner, Carol Channing, Ethel Merman, Rex Harrison, Richard Burton. I saw all these people live perform.
Wow.
And when you kind of absorb that level of performance and that type of talent, you're naturally interested and gravitate toward that type of storytelling. So I did theater in school. I went to the New Orleans NOCA, the New Orleans Center of Creative Art, which is where Harry Connick's a graduate, and Wynton Marsalis, and so many great people. My friend Wendell Pierce, who's on Broadway now in Death of a Salesman. We all went there, and it was kind of an incubator. It's our arts high school, and it became an incubator for talent. And from there, I went to NYU. And there was an acting teacher I had to study with. Her name's Stella Adler. Stella was 90 when I studied with her. She was Marlon Brando's acting teacher and muse.
Wow.
An amazing woman. Stella taught me a lot about how to pace and lay a story out and your obligation as an actor. And she would always say, Laura, and I still think of this a little bit when I speak, when I'm on TV. She said, the reason we have this platform is to remind humanity of who they are and to remind them of their humanity. So she didn't see theater as just entertainment, but as a way of kind of elevating culture and keeping society intact. So I still consider that a bit of what I do.
Wow.
And so the storytelling, the fiction, all of that came really from that theater experience, wanting to tell stories in a way. But all those characters I create on the page, I wrote a Will Wilder series, which is a middle grade series for kids, about 8 to 80. But they're 3 books. I'm writing the 4th now for Random House. And all those characters are really little bits and pieces of me. You're playing all the roles. So when you're taught that approach to acting, script analysis and digging deep into the clues in the text are a big part of your training, and then putting it on like you'd put a coat on on your instrument, on your body, and becoming that character. So that training really is what I still use every time I write anything. I write from inside out and outside in. You kind of do, how does the externals give you clues of the character? And are there subtle subtextual things that you can lay in that the audience might pick up around the edges? So it's still my approach. So I'm still a kid of the theater at the end of the day.
Wow. Well, two things. First of all, you have to give our viewers your tip that you gave me one time. We were on set and I had a cold for like 3 weeks and I kept clearing my throat. And you said, this is how I knew, Raymond, that you were, theater through and through, because this was a real like theater hack. You said, you're going to damage your vocal cords if you keep clearing your throat like this. What's the tip for people out there so they don't damage their vocal cords?
Yeah, whenever you get a little, this time of year, you want to,
I wasn't doing it quite like that, but
you weren't that bad, but I've heard some that are.
Some are.
The best thing to do is to hum. Drink warm water or tea with honey. If you really want to clear it quickly, put a little bourbon in, which is the singer's trick. Yeah, between the matinee, you hit a little, hit the thermos with the tea, the bourbon, and the hot, hot tea. It works, and honey. But hum. You just go, It does the same thing. It will clear the vocal cords the same way that aggressive does, but you can really hurt yourself that way. So yes, a little vocal tip.
I thought that was a good tip to have. Now I feel like there's a level of it's always serious, I think, when you're on TV, but now you're saying that we're sort of keeping humanity at bay. Now there's a whole another layer to it, Raymond. So I don't know, that's a lot. I want to go back to your books though, because how many books have you written at this point?
Oh my gosh, I think 8 or 9. I think we're up to 9. Yeah.
That's amazing. Obviously, you're a New York Times best-selling author many times over, I believe, but not just for writing traditional books, also the children's books you were just referencing. That's a pretty wide array of writing. Are they different for you to write? And is one more impactful in your mind, or one do you like doing more than the other?
Well, Laura, I started writing for adults, and in many ways, I still write for adults. You know this from reading to your children.
Yeah.
When I read Peter Pan or Treasure Island to my kids, every time I read it, I would weep like a baby at different points. And you don't even know why that's happening. But I think a piece of that is the child read it the first time and got the story and loved the story. The adult sees things and feels things that you missed as a child. So when I write I call it writing for families. These are family reads, because you're writing for the child today and you're writing for that child when it grows and he grows or she grows. So this type of literature is more complicated, frankly, than straight adult literature, because you do have to layer in a sense of wonder. You've got to keep the pace up, keep a lot of cliffhangers, because kids, as you know, have attention spans about that big. So that is a challenge. That's the biggest challenge. But I have an innate kind of sense of rhythm. I mean, even when I'm on TV, when we're laying out a segment for my, the Ingram angle or a segment you and I are doing, I do try to pace it, because I'm very aware of the audience doesn't have an obligation to listen to us, Laura.
That's right.
So we have to kind of keep varying things, giving them little surprises, but keeping the pace going. And I feel that deeply when I'm writing. And I read through things aloud a lot to feel that pace and how it's working or not, and use that as a guide to edit or pull back. But it's the same thing. You're writing from you're writing from your experience, what you observe, hopefully something dear to you, close to you. But I'm looking for a way to lift and enchant families too. You want them to have that experience together. And so I've dedicated a lot of my writing life now to writing for families, because that exchange of experience between the mom and dad and the children, that's an irreplaceable memory, particularly at Christmas time. There's nothing like it. They will remember those moments long after they've forgotten what they read or what they ate that day. They will remember that moment with you. And so that's all I'm trying to facilitate. A little moment of conversation, a shift of the heart, and maybe a different understanding of things we took for granted. That's if I can accomplish that, it's a good day.
Well, it's a very rewarding thing, I think, to be able to do to write in this way. And I think you're right. I've experienced this myself with my kids. The Giving Tree is a book that I
Oh,
remember reading when
beautiful.
I was, yeah, when I was a kid, and I loved it. And you know what? It's funny because I didn't realize until I reread it to my kids, there really aren't a whole lot of pictures in there. There's not a whole lot to see. I
Yeah.
think it's black and white. It's just kind of stick
Yeah.
drawings.
Line
And
drawings.
right, and
Hmm.
but you obviously have to use your imagination. But rereading it with my kids is one of my kids' favorite books. And my son, one time reading it, I think it was the second time we read it, he started crying because he was so
Yeah.
upset with what was happening to this tree and how it was
Yeah.
giving itself so much. But to see the full circle of me reading it when I was a kid, enjoying it, reading it with my kids, and seeing my kids kind of take something
Mhm.
for themselves away from it. What a rewarding experience. And then to be able to be an author of something like
Yeah.
that, that's amazing. And I'm very impressed always by people who can do that.
It's a gift. Look, it's a gift to me. It's a gift to anybody who writes for young audiences and for families. You know, L. Frank Baum, who wrote The Wizard of Oz, used to say, I write for the young and I write for the young at heart. And that's really my audience too. I'm writing, you know, even, you know, I did a book a few years ago called The Spider Who Saved Christmas. It's an old Eastern European legend about Mary, Joseph, and Jesus are running to Egypt. They hide in a cave, and this spider ends up saving them in a very unconventional way. But it explains, Laura, why we hang tinsel on Christmas trees. It's an Eastern European practice that came from this story. And somehow we lost it in America. We didn't get the story or get the memo. So I
Mhm.
wanted to remind people of that. But that story, so many people send me notes about, we read this every Christmas Eve. We read this before we have Christmas dinner. We read this when we come home from services on Christmas night. That is, there's no greater honor. They're allowing you and your story into the heart of their family. And to elevate them, to have that moment and to be the instigator of that, to me, there's no greater blessing in my life, truly.
Absolutely. Well, obviously you're talented in many ways. You had an interest in entertainment in many varieties, I think, from a young age. But
Yeah.
how about journalism? Was that something you fell into? Because obviously it's a big part of what you do now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I always wrote. I was always a writer. I reviewed plays, and I started coming out of college. I was working in London, working here in New York. But frankly, I have to tell you, I was not challenged by the theater. After about 3 weeks, after 3 weeks of rehearsal, once I got it on its feet and you were doing the show, after a week, I'm bored as to tears,
Oh,
Laura, because it's the
wow.
same thing again and
Yeah.
again and again. It's not for me, it wasn't intellectually challenging,
Hmm.
emotionally taxing, physically taxing, but I wasn't enjoying it all that much, the
Okay.
repetition. So a friend of mine got me an interview with the Associated Press here in New York, and I worked there. That was my first job really out of college. I worked at the AP. I was doing pickup stories and theater reviews and whatever I could get my hands on. But I learned a lot working with those guys who had copy to turn in every day, how to tersely tell a story. And again, the theatrical background helped me because I knew how to dramatically set things off. But the limited nature of journalism, 700 words and
Hmm.
writing it succinctly and sticking to the facts and layering in those bits of art, that was the challenge. And from there, I went to Washington. I became a Capitol Hill correspondent, worked with Bob Novak, the great dean of the Washington Press Corps. Evans and Novak had a column 3 days a week at the Washington Post. I was their reporter for the column. And when Raleigh Evans got sick, I would help draft up one of those columns. It would help Bob on the other two. So that was kind of a very high stakes environment, and taught me a lot. Bob Novak taught me a great deal about sourcing and chasing down a lead and breaking news and how to bring the audience a little something new every time, all of which I still try to do in my work.
Well, would tell me about how you feel in terms of the state of journalism today,
Mm.
because I have to tell you, just my direct experience. Talk about sourcing, talk about checking your
Mm.
sources and all. People don't even bother with that. It seems like in many respects anymore, Raymond.
No.
Where do you think things are now compared to when you started,
Well,
and where do you think we're headed?
Well, remember, I started in the Stone Age, Laura, when Bob Novak would send me out. We'd have a list of questions, things we needed confirmed or sourced. Yeah. I would get in a taxi and go down to the morgue at the Washington Post and literally go through the files or the old papers. Wow. That's how we confirmed things for the column every day. There was no internet. The internet has destroyed journalism because anything you publish on the internet becomes established fact, and then it's very difficult to unravel that. It's like the Steele dossier or any of this other stuff that just gets thrown out there, taken at face value, and then they simply reference the last journalist to peddle the story. That's not sourcing. Right. And I get very irritated when they have less than 2 sources and they don't properly chase down a story. We have very few real, what I call shoe leather journalists left. We need more of those. So I think J schools would be well to take the devices away from the students and make them build their stories based on firsthand interviews and only that. The other stuff, I think, dilutes journalism, and it just becomes nothing more than elevated, I think, technological gossip. And I'm not sure it serves the populace at all.
Well, I certainly agree with all of that. I don't think it serves anyone. If you here's the problem too, is if you Google something, which most of us do, right? We want to look up a person or, a location, there's so much bias that has already gone into when you hit enter. They have filtered through everything. You Google my name, believe me, you're going to get a lot of terrible things that come up. Most of them aren't even true, but it doesn't even matter. I think it's very detrimental to us as a society. I think the trajectory long term for something like this is honestly very frightening. I look at my kids and I think, what will it be like for them one day? But man, you're right. We need to get some real journalism back into America because I just don't know how we go forward from here if we don't. It's a frightening place, I think, to exist.
Well, it's very difficult for Americans to know where to go for truth, where to go for answers. So what's happening is their hearts have been broken so many times, their trust violated so many times. They simply say, no more. I'm not watching these broadcast networks. I'm not watching those cable networks. I refuse to subscribe to this. And you see a wholesale collapse of the industry. And that is, I get that some people say, well, this is natural. This is the comeuppance they created. On the other hand, where do we go? Right. Where do we go, Laura? And as you say, and it's a tough question, where will our children go to get this information? And I wish I had answers. I read multiple sources a day and cross compare. And you go to the most credible sources you can find, but those sources are becoming fewer and harder to establish the veracity of what they're reporting.
Well, I'll tell you where the youth of America, at least at this point, is going, and it's to social media, to TikTok, and I mean, what kind of information are these kids getting? And you clearly see that they've been pushed in one direction with the way that at least a lot of the younger generation is voting now. But I really don't know. It's a frightening thing. I'm grateful for those journalists out there who actually do the job as it was meant to be done, because quite frankly, it's one of the few things that I feel like is holding us together as a society. And people ask me all the time, where do you go to get information? How do I know what to trust? How do I know who to trust? It's tough to say right now, but I'm grateful for all the things you've done in your past, because I think you're one of the few that maybe still exists out there, Raymond.
Well, and you asked the question, why do I do this? I do this because when you have institutions crumbling like this, when you have politics in shambles, when you have journalism so politicized and not trusted by the people, at the end of the day, there's only one unit that I think will hold all of the country and civilization together, and that is the family. Right. You need mom and dad and the kids and hopefully the grandparents and a wider community. But if that nucleus isn't there, meaning if they haven't spent the time together, if they're not sharing the values and having the conversations about the things that bemuse them and confuse them, if you're not having that at home, it's not being had. And therefore, TikTok and Instagram are raising your children. I want that conversation to take place. And that's much of the reason why I write these family reads. So it forces the family together around something enjoyable and a moment of joy and hopefully light, where they can experience each other. That is the most important gift we can give our children, the time spent with them. And every study shows this, Laura. You want to know why reading grades are down? Not enough time spent reading to the children. You want to know why math scores are down? Not enough time spent with that child. You want to know why kids are suicidal and on drugs and doing all kinds of crimes in our streets? Not enough time spent telling that kid he's loved, valued, and unique. We need to reestablish that somehow. And if we don't, we will lose whatever shell of America remains. We will lose it.
Yeah, I know. I agree with all of that. It's interesting though, because I've seen myself, my kids are 3 and 5. They want you to read to them. They want to do that. Those are the things that they're yearning to do. They want to learn. They want to absorb all of this. And, you know, I get that it's easier to stick them in front of a screen, but I have to tell you, every single time my kids ask me to read with them, which is pretty much every night, even if it's a little later than I would like it to be for them to be going to bed, I always make time to at least read one book with them, because I think what you're saying is right. I think that is so integral to how they're raised, to what they enjoy later in life, to forming a complete, you know, whole human being. I think it's so important. So
Laura, it's everything. It's everything. Brain, and we see the studies, brain development. Do you know there was a study I did, I saw many years ago, I didn't do it, at Princeton, and they put adults in, what do you call these things? What are those scans that go and they put you in?
MRI?
MRI, thank you. Senior moment. They put adults in an MRI with iPods on, and they read them the same chapter of Charles Dickens, just one chapter. What they discovered is that the brain fired in the same place at the same time in each movement of that story. And what the researchers called it was brain synchronicity, that a story had the power to create brain synchronicity in people from across socioeconomic spectrums, cultural and gender and racial backgrounds. It made everyone's mind operate in the same way at the same time. Their breathing even regulated in the same way. The power of stories read is an untapped gift. And I think we have to share that with our children. It's your moment as a mom to share not only your voice with your child and your understanding of the world, but in some ways your heartbeat itself, your breathing with that child. It's an amazing kind of, when you read those studies, it's mind-blowing.
Wow, that's very cool. And, you know, just goes to further the idea that we should be doing more of this. Tell me about the latest book, your newest children's book, The Wise Men Who Found Christmas. Tell us about that.
Okay, I'm going to turn the tables on you for just a little moment here, Laura. What do you know about the wise men?
The 3 wise men, they came to the Bethlehem to see baby Jesus in the manger and brought him gifts, correct?
Gifts, okay. And we all assume there were 3 of them, and they came from the Far East. And given the song, "We Three Kings of Orient Are," that they were from the Far East and kings. All of that is wrong, Lara.
Oh, good.
All of it is wrong. That is a 6th to 7th century creation, 700 years after this happened. When you read the 1st century readings, which I stumbled on, I was looking for a legend about the wise men to retell or refashion. What I discovered is everything we know about the wise men is legendary. So I said, well, let me tell the real story.
Wow.
They were not 3 of them. The Coptic Church says there might have been 60 wise men, 60. The Syrian and Armenian Church say there were 12. What?
I said that changes the song quite a bit.
You bet. Well, remember the gospel. Read the gospel closely. The gospel only talks about 3 gifts, not 3 wise men. It just says wise men from the East carried these 3 gifts to the child, not that there were 3 of them.
Okay.
And the king thing came much later. Even those traditional names we think we know, Caspar, Balthazar, Melchior, those names were created by a guy named Venerable Bede in England in the late 600s. And they all just mean king in different languages. Like Caspar is a knockoff of Kaiser from the German. Melchior is is Hebrew. it's a Hebrew take on king. So much of this was fictionalized. I said, wait a minute, what do we know about these guys? So I started digging through the first century literature, a lot of the early writings. They say very clearly, the wise men came from the East, Arabia. It's the immediate East. They were just in actually present day Petra, the kingdom of Nabateh. So once I started looking at that, I said, wow, where is this kingdom? Who is this king they're serving? What's the political and historical setting looks like? So I decided to tell an adventure using all that information for families. And I came up with The Wise Men Who Found Christmas. And it is the true story of these wise men set in their world. And it ends up being this high stakes adventure, like a buddy movie, except my wise men are not on camels, Laura. They are on horseback, because Arabian horses were introduced 100 years before Jesus into this part of the world, into this kingdom of Nabateh. And those three gifts tell us exactly where these guys are from. Also, cool. Three gifts made and controlled by the kingdom of Nabateh in modern day Petra. So once you see all of that and you put it together, I thought, let's elevate this and make people see this in a new way. These characters they took for granted. And thank goodness people are excited about it and loving it. And it's told for kids, but my author's note gets into a lot of the background, the research that sort of led me down this path.
Wow. Well, I need to read it just so next time I'm asked, I actually have the real
That's
answer
right.
for the wise men. That's very cool. Well, I have to say that, you know, you have done such an incredible job with kind of, you're saying you're retelling a story, but I love that this is the real version of it. And anything around the holidays, around Christmas, I think becomes part of our tradition as families. So this is a great one. And I love that you're doing it. And where can people find this book?
They can find it everywhere. Amazon, Barnes & Noble has a big promotion on. It's been constantly among Amazon's best Christmas books for kids. So I hope you'll go get it. But those gifts, I'll give you, if you have another second, the three gifts, we take these for granted. I didn't even know what they were, frankly, or where they came from. I knew what frankincense was. Frankincense is just the incense that's burned, you know, that smells really good. But all of it's from tree resin. Both myrrh and frankincense are just tree resin. Where were those trees? Southern Arabia, controlled by this kingdom of Nabateh.
There's a lot of research that went into this, Raymond.
Well, once you dig in, you kind of go down the rabbit hole and you have to go. And I consulted with biblical scholars, astronomers, first century antiquity historians, you know, on the life of King Herod. In fact, we're doing a Fox Nation special called The Wise Men Who Found Christmas that digs deep into this research. But the story is one of these men who kept their eyes, and I guess it's the lesson for us this Christmas. They kept their eyes heavenward. They weren't concerned about all the things of earth and all the horrible things happening around them, and there were a lot of them. They kept their eyes high, looking for something more. And when inspiration called them, when they saw the truth, Lara, they got on their horses and they ran out after it. They pursued it with vigor. And my hope is that families this Christmas won't let Christmas slip by in the same way, but will go out and meet it, go out and find it and rediscover it in your family life, in your personal life, because the light they sought and the light they found is still available to us today. And I think that journey makes it worth going. So it's a really cool story. I love to take something that people take for granted and kind of just shift the focus a little bit. And the historical evidence gives us that opportunity, I think.
Excellent. Well, we should all read it, if nothing else, for nothing else than to actually find out the truth and the real background here. Cool. And of course, entertainment for our children as well is always positive. And I also like giving my kids, you know, lessons I feel like are just so important when it comes to children. And I love a book that has some greater meaning. And that's why we like the Giving Tree, I think, so much.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
But, yeah, telling them about the history, about, you know, a biblical story in a more exciting way for them. I absolutely love that. So that's kudos to you for getting involved.
Well, Look, the reason the Giving Tree works all these years later, the reason that the Spider book works is because it's not about spiders or trees.
Right.
It's really about our lived experience and
Yes.
parenting and loving. And in the case of the Spider book, early on in the book, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus enter the cave, and Joseph has his staff, and he's trying to kill this big honking spider that's over the baby.
Can't blame him. Can't blame him.
Oh, who wouldn't? Who wouldn't want to kill the spider? And Mary stops him and says, Joseph, let her be. All are here for a reason, as she looks at her baby that she's holding. Oh. And that really becomes the governing theme of the whole story and the reason for its being. And even though this spider is insignificant and scary and lives in the shadows, it had a reason and a purpose that was all unto itself. It was set apart to do something. And children instinctively get that without you having to tell them.
Right.
And that's the power of these stories, whether it's a tree or a spider or three wise men chasing after a star. And children understand on a deeper level than we think. And I've seen that as I've read all over the country. I'm off to Nashville next weekend and Washington, D.C., but I've been to Arizona and Dallas. It's amazing how children process the story far differently than adults. And that's the beauty of writing for these audiences.
It's so much fun. I love it. Well, final question I have to ask you, Raymond, because I ask everyone who comes on my show, would you ever run for political office? Why or why not?
I'm going to ask you, will you ever run for political office, Laura?
You're turning it around on me again.
Well, you have a far greater chance of victory than I would. I can tell you, about that. Given what I say on these shows. But you always comport yourself and come away, with your respectability intact. After you fall off the chair one too many times and, get caught in those controversies with Laura Ingraham, you may never return to anything.
So fun. I love it.
No,
so maybe not directly.
My calling.
No,
it's not my calling, Laura. I look, like what your father-in-law did. I have great respect for that calling, but it has to be a calling. Yeah. I'm not sure if I would want to subject, this more than anybody. I'm not sure I would want to subject my family to the attacks and the scrutiny. I think it's awfully hard to run for public office, and it is a high calling, and we need good people there. But it's nothing I've ever felt drawn to. I really haven't.
Well, I can appreciate that. Believe me, like you said, so much because it's a tough business to be in, and I think you're right.
Cost.
Yes, a very high cost. Some more so than others. But you know what? For people who are willing to do it, God bless them, because you're right. We need good people. We need people who are doing it for the right reasons and truly, want what's best, I think, for this country, their communities, wherever it is that they're running. So, Raymond, we'll just have to keep living with you through the books and on TV and all the other incredible things that you do. You're so wonderful, and we appreciate so much you coming on. Everybody go out and get the book. I need to get this now for my kids because I think it would be very special to start a tradition like this with them.
It's a neat tradition. And then I have, Laura, I'll give you a little tiny preview. I have a new series coming out in the new year from HarperCollins. And it's about young American lives at crisis points. It's called Turnabout Tales. And it is that moment in the young life when they were faced with a major crisis and a decision was made and all history turned. And I'm so excited about this series because it's what you were talking about earlier. You want your kids to get lessons. And these are great lives that we have forgotten or lost. The first one is Thomas Edison, and I've got others in the wings, but that's going to be a fun series that we can read throughout the year and not just at Christmas time.
Love it. Very cool. Well, we'll be on the lookout. Raymond Arroyo, we appreciate you very much. I will see you sometime soon, my friend. Merry Christmas to you, and thank you for joining us.
Merry Christmas to you and Eric and the children, and I hope we see each other soon.
Thank you very much. Right back at you. And to everybody, as always, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time for more.